Hello and welcome to Book Lust. I'm Nancy Pearl. My guest today at Folio in downtown Seattle is Daniel Handler, aka Lemony Snicket, whose new book, a memoir and a guide to creative endeavors, is called And Then What Else? Daniel, thank you so much. I know you're in England working hard. I envy you being
Well,
there.
it's a delight to be here. I pity the fool who passes up a chance to talk with Nancy Pearl.
Oh, well, you're too nice. But I have to say, I loved your book. Um, Anybody who knows me well knows that I am not a fan of memoirs. Some people love memoirs. That's highest on their list. I'm not normally a fan of memoirs. What I loved about your book, though, was the way that it was a memoir, but it was how your life fit in with who you became as a writer and a creator. Is that fair?
yes, I think that's fair. I share your hesitation about memoirs. Every so often over the years, people have said, "Oh, you should write a memoir," and I thought, chapter one, I am born. Chapter six, somebody heard of me. Chapter 30, yesterday, and I just thought, I never want a book like that. Um, but I do get interested in books that are kind of trying to choose several things over at once and trying to fit themselves in there like that.
Yeah.
So this book began as an introduction to a new translation of poems by Baudelaire,
Oh,
and and the editor said, "I think you're onto something here. You're talking about a million things. It's too long for the introduction to Baudelaire, but maybe you can do something." And that was finally, I realized, oh, that's my way in to talk about a few things that have been on my mind without, beginning with a description of the town in which I was born.
I have never read Baudelaire. I really had no desire to. I mean, it just never came into my orbit, or I never, whatever, however you would put that. But then the way you used your love of Baudelaire and your discovery of him as really a kid almost, um, just made me, and your quotes, the quotes that you took from him were so evocative and just seemed to run parallel to everything that you were discovering and thinking about. God, I loved this book so much. It was so interesting. It was just fascinating. Um, all right, there's a wonderful story that Beverly Cleary used to tell about when she would do school visits. And, she would talk about writing the book and her books. And, these were to like third and fourth graders. And at one of them, a little boy, was just frantic to talk to her and kept, Mrs. Cleary, Mrs. Cleary. And, so she called on him and he said, Mrs. Cleary, I understand everything about writing, but where do you get your paper? And so this is a where do you get your paper kind of question. One of the things I loved about the book, your book, is that you have lengthy quotes. You don't just give a sentence. I mean, you really give the reader a sense of who these writers are and what it is about them that engages you and maybe will engage the reader. Was it hard to get this is my question. It's embarrassing. Was it hard to get permission to quote that much? Because you had to go to them. I mean, some of the stuff is in the public domain, but
No, I love that question.
oh,
And I don't mind saying that I guess it depends what you mean by difficult. It costs a lot of money,
yeah.
and it's and that was really important to me. I'm happy to be in a position where I can afford to, not make a lot of money up front with this particular book. But yeah, we had to spend quite a
Ton.
bit of money.
Yeah.
Um, and but I mean, I have all kinds of ideas about fair use and things like that that, someday when you and I are having a cocktail together, we can talk about. But
Yeah.
but yeah, it was interesting. And then it was also because of that, I had to work directly with a permissions person. And that's just, one of the umpteen professions that you don't really hear about, you don't think about unless it's right in front of you. And it was interesting to see the sort of person who doggedly pursues these things, because some of the quotes are from easily obtainable things, and some of them were quite the rabbit hole.
Right.
So
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. It's sort of, I think that the permissions person might be a little bit like the um, interlibrary loan person at the public library, the person who's getting all the, finding who has it and sending in the requests. And there's all sorts of
yeah.
obscure rules. And
I was reminded of the continuity person because I've been on a few movie and television sets, and there's someone whose job it is to say that coffee cup was not on that shelf when we were shooting this angle 3 hours ago. You have to move it. I took a photograph. We have to move it right back into place, and that is the sort of I would be so terrible at that job. I would. And so, but I remember when I've met continuity people, and I just wanted to test them. I wanted to like throw a deck of cards up in the air and say, okay, which one did I just catch or something? Because their eye and their organizational mind was really supreme. And it's also one of those things that you imagine that when they were 9 years old, the parents said, well, they're very organized and they have a great visual sense, but I don't know where this is going. What is this mind? Where can this mind find a home? And then to just see, they're running continuity on a set. It's perfect.
yeah, they're working with Ben Affleck,
Yeah, exactly. They're telling Ben Affleck that his sleeves were not rolled down. He has to roll them
Right.
back.
What are the things that the book and then what else that you in that book? A lot of it is almost like a how it's almost like a how I write from the way that you organize and the way that you think about things. And one of the things that I was very taken with is that you talk about how you have little notebooks that you write down passing thoughts or references. Do you have all those notebooks?
I do. I have a basement full of plastic bins of notes and things for the duration of my literary career. I pity the poor grad student who might someday have to paw through them. Um, but they feel I mean, all I can say is that it reminds me of something beloved you might have in your kitchen. Just that wooden spoon that always does the job. It's quite mangled and things like that. Or, just that brand of red pepper that is better than any other brand of red pepper. That's what it reminds me of. And if you were to go through all these bins, you would say, "Oh, look, he got into these notebooks for a while. Now he got into these notebooks for a while." But yeah, I don't, I mean, I don't think I will ever look at any of them again, but I can't imagine throwing them out.
Yeah,
So
yeah, that's what I was
sorry
going
to
to.
my heirs.
Do you date? Do they have dates? I mean, when you start one, do you put the date?
I
I'm sorry
usually
for all
do.
those.
Yeah, I'm not super methodical about it. There's something that feels a little arrogant about being too methodical, as if I'm saying, oh, of course, posterity will be very, very interested in when I first noted this thing. And I don't think that, so I don't like to prep it, but I try to, and I like going down to that basement sometimes and looking at all the bins because that feels like the real work. The book is a kind of published, finished version of this thing, but all of the legal pads and the notebooks and all that that's the stuff of the work. That's the real work that I'm doing.
For me, I just have notebooks of favorite poems, and some quotes or some just by the way things. But I love the idea of just pulling out. You're not doing it on your cell phone or anything. You're just, you know.
Yeah, no, I don't. I'm a hopelessly analog person. I held out against having a cell phone for absolutely as long as I could. Um, and I don't, it feels hostile to me. And in fact, I was just a couple of days ago on Etsy looking to see if I could find a case for my phone that says something that I could personalize that would say something like, take out your notebook instead, or are you sure you need to look at this right now? Something that would even further remind me, because I already have a distaste for it. And just every so often, I don't like the way it intrudes. I don't. And so every so often, if I'm sitting someplace or on a train or something, I'll start to take it out. And before I know it, I'll be upset about something. I'll be angry about something. I'll be overwhelmed by something that I remembered I had to do. It's the opposite. And paper feels like the opposite to me, where I just get to let my brain unspool and get itself in line if I need to. And so, yeah, I'm not a phone person.
So you and I are obviously much. We're first of all, we're different people. Second of all, we're different generations and all of that. But when I was reading your book, the books that you, many of the books that you loved are books that I loved too. And so I had this on my bookshelf. Can you see it? It's Kit Reed's second novel.
Oh my goodness.
Talk about Kit Reed, because
Yeah,
she taught at Wesleyan, where you went to your undergrad.
you
Um,
did.
and this is like a first edition. This is one of my all-time favorite novels. Have you read
It's a
this one?
wonderful novel.
It's a
Yeah,
wonderful, wonderful novel, and it's
it's a
of course
beautiful, beautiful book.
long out of print. This is it cost $4.50 originally in hardback, and
A bargain at 10 times the price.
it's a first printing, and this was a book. So when you talked to,
My heart.
yeah, me too. I loved that book, and the
And did you
other.
know her at all? Did you know her?
No, I wrote to her about the book, but I didn't know her. But my daughter, you talk a little bit about your experience at Wesleyan, and my daughter is a professor there, in the theater department,
Oh,
and
wonderful.
and you have one paragraph about um, living in Middletown, where Wesleyan is, which I
Yeah.
called my daughter to read her that, and she just started laughing and totally felt the same way. And it's that kind of personality. Your personality, I think, comes through in this book in a way that I think, first of all, you talk about the reading experience and what reading does for kids, in such an evocative way. And in a way, reading your book did that for me. I mean, I felt like I was in a different place, but there were these touchstones, like Four Frightened People. I have that book too, and
Oh, yeah.
and loved that book. I have the original Virago black cover,
Yeah.
and just those, and then your Wesleyan connection, and a meager little town, I believe you described, and the Peter Pan bus taking it to New York and Boston, and your two experiences taking, or wanting to take a creative writing class, and ended up
Yeah.
taking Kit Reed's. Could you talk about, because I know people are always interested in the that they want to write, but the techniques
Yeah.
of writing, or talk about that.
Well, I mean, I think there's such a mythology attached to writing and to being a writer that it can get in the way of so many um, people's experiences of trying to write or wanting to be a writer or wanting to be just involved with literature. And it feels like a cliche to complain that some of it is about creative writing classes, but some of it really is. And when I arrived at Wesleyan, there was a very famous writer whom I won't name, who's not at Wesleyan anymore. And you could take her class, and you had to submit materials and have a meeting with her. And I had a meeting with her, and she was very harsh. Um, First of all, she told me we were supposed to bring our anything that we'd published anyplace, and she told me that my credentials were really bad. And I was 18 years old. You know, I don't know how many 18-year-olds she had who had just been published in the New Yorker, but I wasn't one of them. You know, I'd been published in my high school literary magazine and a couple of other little things, you know, for high school students. And she made me feel like I was already behind. I was already a failure. And then she was going to assign me a poem to memorize, and that we were going to meet all of us outside and recite our poems. And there's nothing wrong with memorizing a poem and reciting it. At the time when I was 18, that was kind of my primary seduction technique. Not an effective one, I should note, for anyone who's going to try it. But, and I was put off by the whole experience. I thought, oh, I'm interested in writing and reading. I'm not interested in being demeaned and being assigned things to memorize. None of that seemed like what I wanted to do. Um, and I say this in the book, I said, it felt like I walked into medical school on the first day and fainted at the sight of blood. I thought, oh, I guess I'm not a writer because I'm not interested in this. I don't know what this is, but I can't do it. And it was quite a shakeup for me because that was kind of my plan was to become a writer, and the class by the famous writer was not good. And then I met Kit Reed, who I'd never heard of. Um, and she told me she taught a writing class, and that her writing class is that you turned in 10 pages every week, and that you met with her alone in her kitchen to discuss them. You, in fact, only met the other people in the class. There was like a little first gathering, and then there was a midway kind of lunch, and there was a party on the last thing. That was the only time you met the other writers. And she gave you very individual attention. She gave you very individual advice. I would run into other students from time to time and say, "Oh, I bet Kit made you read this that I'm reading." And they would say, "No, she made me read this whole other thing," because she had this wonderful, wonderful kind of open mind and open heart about what literature is, and that it was boundless, that there's innumerable traditions that you can belong to or not belong to, that you can take things from, that you can synthesize. She was so open about like bona fide diversity of writing, not just kind of the individual profiles of the writers, but all of these traditions from all over the world that you could sink into. She was not a snob, so there were people who were writing, kind of trashy genre stuff, and there were people who were writing very highfalutin stuff, and she was open to all of it. She was enthusiastic about all of it, and it was really contagious. And then also she made you write a whole lot. You couldn't hide behind your own pretension or your own beautiful vision of how wonderful it was going to be when you published and you had a great photograph of yourself on the cover. She wasn't interested in that. She wanted you to get better and better and better. And, it's been said by many times, I feel it's often credited to Malcolm Gladwell, so I'll credit him now, that to be a writer, you have to write, a certain number of terrible pages first. And that was not how it was presented to me, but I think that is the idea that Kit just said, yeah, you're terrible because you're young and you're learning. So let's try to write as much as possible, try to get this nailed down, try to learn all this, and then you'll get better. Let's get rid of the bad part of your writing, as quickly as possible. And she became a real mentor for me. Oh, not just in writing, but just in kind of approaching life. And, just at the perfect age because, 18, 19, 20, that's when you can be the most insufferable, snobbish person you'll ever get to be in your life. And I was plenty insufferable. It wasn't like she managed to manage that, but it was really wonderful to have someone to just remind you this thing that you're having trouble with is a problem that many people have had. This literature that you're reading is part of a long tradition. This literature that you want to write is part of a tradition you want to be thoughtful about. And she was just so endlessly generous in that way. And I really, really miss her. She died a few years ago, and hardly a week goes by that I don't have the urge to pick up the bona fide urge to pick up the phone and say, "Oh, I just read this thing," or "I have a funny story for you," or something like that, because she was endlessly enthusiastic. Um, Fans of a series of unfortunate events will notice that there's a character named Kit Snicket who was named after Kit Reed. That was kind of the best thing I felt I could do for her. I think, other people who are lucky enough to be successful, who have a mentor, want to buy them a yacht or a case of champagne or something. And I knew that Kit would just be tickled pink to find her name in a book. And that was just, yeah, we just had a really, really wonderful time. I feel so lucky to have known her. Um, Her husband, too, was kind of another kind of mentor for me. Um, and sometimes I think it probably looked to some people like they were almost parental figures, but they weren't because they were friends of mine. They took me seriously at my age. They never indicated that I was tiresome in some undergraduate way, even though I was tiresome in every undergraduate way. And yeah, and then I love meeting her readers because that's a whole other kind of
Right,
secret club.
right.
And her own writing really defied genre in a lot of ways. And when I'm in a used bookshop, I most often see her in sci-fi.
Yep,
She
me too.
sold science fiction magazines, and she was one of the few women, you often see like Isaac Asimov and Frank Herbert and then her or something. And she was often, one of the few women or even the only woman in some anthologies and magazines. And some of her work definitely can comfortably fit in that category, but she was really interested in just kind of the strangeness of life and how it happens to people. And
Just what you're interested in. I mean, that's just what
yeah,
you're interested
I
in.
mean, it's just what excites me, and also just like kind of all of my favorite writers and artists. There's something where you say they're not quite that. They kind of go in this category, but they're not. And I always think that's when you are reminded that literature is real and that categories are false.
Yeah, yeah.
You talked about being so lucky to have met her, and I wanted to ask you, um, you've had a lot. It seemed to me reading this book that many things in your life came about as a result of luck. You know that.
Yeah.
Yeah, isn't that interesting that we don't? I mean, because you met Kit Reed at a dinner party, I think is what you said, and luck,
Like
and
a kind of college dinner. Yeah.
yeah, you were sitting next to her. I mean,
Yeah.
that's luck. It was.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, there was other instances, or the books that you picked up. I mean, one of the things that I was so that I so much enjoyed reading in your book was how important reading is to becoming a writer, and that's what Kit Reed did for you. That she'd say, well, this is, this reminds me of Muriel Spark. You should read more Muriel Spark and things like that.
Yeah.
I mean, so it wasn't. It was. You talk about reading as taking you away from where you are, but in some ways, it cements you in where you are in all the best ways, I think.
Yeah. I mean, I think it can center you as a person. I think there's a reason why, even people who don't read very much, what they're probably doing is reading before bed.
Yeah.
I think there's a reason why you read to your child before bed. There's plenty of other times you might read to your child, but like definitely that. And that, I think it works in a way that we can probably measure chemically in the mind.
Right.
Um, but I think to really feel that the landscape of literature is boundless, that there's really a place for everyone in it, whether as a reader or as a practitioner or both. And that I think that is just so powerful. And I mean, as you said, I'm here in England for a few months, and I'm in Oxford, and there's not enough hours in the day for me to describe the joy of the libraries there. But I just went into London when a friend of mine was visiting, and I took him to my favorite bookstore in London, which is called Daunt Books.
Me
And you go
too.
kind of into the back, and it's arranged by country of origin. And so the novels and the poetry and the history and the guidebooks, you can get all that. You can just say, "Oh, I'm going to Kyoto," and it's like, here's the 16th century poems about Kyoto. Here's the novel about Kyoto that came out last year. Here is a history of Kyoto, and here is a map of all the best places to go in Kyoto. And what I love about it is that it's a bookstore that makes you feel like you have not read anything
Yeah.
because you walk in and there's whole literary traditions, whole regions of the world that you have not explored.
So what are you reading now?
Right now, I'm reading a novel called Suddenly Slowly, and it is by he writes in English, but he started writing novels in English after publishing several volumes of Persian poetry. and I found him at Daunt Books completely randomly. I thought, what is this? And it's about kind of young people trying to figure out their lives. It's not a startling theme, but it's presented really well. And I don't know if I'm just coming to it through the prism of already knowing what this author is about, but I feel that I can sense a kind of multicultural lens. It's about a very ordinary Western experience, but there's something where I think like I really get a sense of what you find universal and what you find foreign just as you're looking there, which is really fun for me to read because I'm here in England. I'm fluent in the language. I'm not confused by what England is, but there's so many cultural differences. There's so much mystery. And so I'm loving reading this. Yeah. And I'm also
Wow.
poetry. I've tried to read poetry all the time. And there is a new book of poetry by Katie Peterson, who's one of my favorites from America. This is called Smoke and Fog. And a lot of it is about the pandemic time, which I think, as you said, with memoirs, I I wouldn't
Yeah.
that wouldn't be my first choice, but she's so sharp and smart about it, and she's so good at illuminating the ordinary. And I don't have it here, so I can't read it to you, but one of the poem ends, how did we survive this? We got married. And it's about her long-term marriage. It isn't like she had a wedding during the pandemic, but it was such a sharp idea to say, yeah, you gather the people you love most in your household. That's how we all got through this. All of us who got through it, right? We got through it with the people who were closest to us, with our little circle. And I thought that was a really beautiful idea.
I have one question, and then unfortunately, I think we have to stop. But a quick question. So one of my favorite poets is Stephen Dunn, who recently died. Did he
Yeah.
speak to you in a not literal sense, but just?
No, yeah, I like his work for sure. Yeah.
Well, I wish we could continue. I mean, I would love it if we were indeed, sitting next to each other or having a drink or something, just to keep talking.
We'll continue it, I'm sure. We won't
Okay.
continue it on this screen, but I know we'll
Okay.
continue.
All right. I would love that. And I think I'm going to go home and reread At War as Children. So, and thank you for your new book. It's coming out in May, I believe. May?
Yep.
And then what else? Which is from Baudelaire, right?
It is.
No?
Yeah. It's a little
Baudelaire.
quote from Baudelaire that always stuck in my head.
Yep. Okay. Thank you so much, Daniel. I just love talking to you.
Ms. Pearl, it's always a pleasure to see you, and I'm so thrilled to be in conversation with you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.